Hey, guess what? They're trying to take over Mosul again. Now, I don't know if you remember, back in 2014, ISIS took over Mosul, which is the second largest city in Iraq. And now the forces are making a big push to take it back right now. On Monday, 4,000 Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga troops retook 10 villages east of Mosul. The commandos lost 6 soldiers while 16 more were wounded, according to Ruda, a news outlet that covers Kurdish affairs. The actual operation into the heart of Mosul is likely to be launched by American-trained Iraqi commandos, though an amalgam of allied forces are taking part in uprooting ISIS from the city. One more, let's keep going. We are expecting up to 6 months of house-to-house fighting. It's going to be a long, long battle, said the Kurdistan regional government official. The main assaults of the first phase is to happen west of Tigris, heading up north toward the mountains overlooking Mosul. This will be the main thrust and spearheaded by 25,000 Iraqi military. Wow, so look at that. And the counterterrorism service, and supported by tribal militia and Peshmerga, would attack at the same time. The Peshmerga, I love the Peshmerga. At the end of that, we'll get to the point where Mosul is surrounded on all sides, says Omar Lamrani, military specialist. So that's what they're doing. They're going in to Mosul, and they're so now there's not going to be any Americans on the ground, but they are using American air power to help them and logistics and stuff like that. And then the Peshmerga goes in, right? And like I said, a combination of forces. I was listening to a report today from the Peshmerga. Everybody seems very happy that this is happening in Iraq, and I think this should fix everything. What do you think, Alonzo?
In a perfect world, it would. A few things. One, no Americans on the ground. There might be a few advisors involved. But what this brings to mind, and we were talking about it in between, the last time I was in Iraq, I was there in 2011 to entertain the troops. And there was a very interesting guy who I talked to. He was the head of security at the base we were on and transportate. And he said, and this guy had studied military operations and so forth, career soldier. And he said, it's time for us to leave and let them grow up. And he said every country goes through a growing period, and they have civil war and so on, including us. The United States did, this makes me think of that, where he was like, yeah, they need to do this themselves. They need to, with the tribal leaders, and because they know their culture, they know who's who, they know who's where. We don't.
Right.
We don't know the culture on that level. So for them to spearhead this operation, for them to say, we're taking our city back, I think it's great. Will it solve everything? Of course not. But it's a step in the right direction. And look, if they beat up ISIS, if they hit ISIS in a major base, or if they weaken ISIS in any way, then that's good for the world.
I agree. Go ahead, Richard.
Look, we went in there with no idea of what we were doing. We know that. We talked about that a million times since we've gone into Iraq. ISIS is going to evolve now from being a pseudo-state inside a couple other countries to being an idea. It's going to be even more dangerous when it becomes an idea, just as it's harder to protect against terrorism, small acts of terrorism today than it was to protect against large acts of terrorism a few years ago, because now it's viral. It's a social media thing. There's a term for it. I forget what, stochastic violence, they call it. It's where it's disseminated, and we're going to see it on the in terrorism, in Islamic radicalism, and we're going to see it on the right. And we're going to see people getting their ideas from social media and acting out on them. That's what ISIS is going to evolve into when they lose, because they probably will lose their ground turf. We don't have any idea. This is why our whole strategy for Syria is so blundering and foolish. We really need to be talking about, I think what your guy said makes a fair amount of sense. Of course, they had it all worked out before we came in, but just not in a way we liked, or should have liked. But we just blundered in there. Yeah, let those folks work it out. Let the frontline states be involved in figuring out how to stabilize their region. And if they're part of the problem, as I would argue, Saudi Saudi Arabia as part of the problem. That needs to be worked out too. But there again, you get into, now I'm going to sound like Alonzo. This is not a perfect world. We are in bed with those Saudi Arabians who are a big part of the problem, big part of this Wahhabi Islam that's driving the terrorism and driving ISIS. So this is a problem that's going to take a long time to work out.
That's another thing. Some of the WikiLeaks, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they reveal that Saudi Arabia is funding ISIS? Wasn't there? But we know that that's happening, right? So I don't need an email to show it anyway. We know that, and what...
And we're selling them weapons that are being used to brutalize people in Yemen, which is creating a whole new generation of radicals. We never think 2 steps ahead. We never say, I'm going to go in, I'm going to blow, again, I'm going to quote you a lot. I'm going to go in, I'm going to blow up your whole damn village and a whole bunch of innocent people. I'm going to drone a bunch of people not knowing if they're guilty or not. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Well, of course, we have a generation of people who hate us now.
We've had this problem with Saudi Arabia forever, right, where they are our allies, right, and we buy their oil and stuff, and no one in the U.S. government has ever gotten tough and leaned on Saudi Arabia and said, look, you can't do this anymore. Nobody, and I don't know who's going to be the politician. I don't know when we're going to have the government that's going to do that. Saudi is a problem because it's like they're our friends. But if you have a friend doing bad things, at some point you have to lean on that friend. You have to apply pressure, whether it be economic or through sanctions, through whatever means you have. Saudi is a problem, but the other big problem we have in the Middle East, and this has always been a problem, we don't understand their culture, and we refuse to respect that they have a culture that has worked for them for thousands of years. And you kind of have to, like you were saying, you kind of have to say, hey, what explain this to, or you guys do this yourself, because we don't understand it. You know what I mean? You have, it is very tribal, and you have the different factions within the Muslim religion that battle each other, and you have the families and the history of the families, and we don't know anything about any of that. And we think we're going to, initially think, well, we're going to come in and expose them to the Western world. And it was like, wait a minute, they don't want the Western world. Like, we didn't even understand.
Right.
How could you not want the Western way of life? And they don't want the Western way of life, So I don't know what the solution is there, but I would love to see someone put pressure on Saudi Arabia or hold Saudis accountable at some point.
I mean, here's something. You've been in Afghanistan. In the late 60s, Afghanistan was part of what they called the hippie trail. We think of these people as generations of warfare, bloodshed, they hate each other. People used to go to Afghanistan to smoke opium.
Yes.
It was a hippie place. You drive in with your psychedelic van from wherever. These people were not always this way, and we should be looking at what are the different forces. Well, one force, us. Another force, the Saudis. Quick story, I was in Albania after it had been closed to the West for 40 years, the communist dictatorship, closed off to the entire Western world. I was in there after that collapse with an aid team about 40 days after it opened up. And there were no restaurants. There was one place you could go to get a meal, and it was a garage, and they had card tables set up and a boombox playing Garth Brooks. And that was for everybody who was coming in, as the A group. And the second day I was there, heard the call to prayer, again on a loudspeaker. The Saudis were already there. Albania had a history of Sufi Islam that was very peace-loving and very inclusive. The Saudis were already there, making sure that when they started up their religion again, it was their own extremist version. So the Saudis are part of the problem, we're part of the problem, and we don't think in terms of the big picture, like you were saying, when we go into these countries.
Can you point to any successes in the Middle East for the United States? I mean, it seems like every time like when we went to Iran, we got rid of their democratically elected government because he was going to nationalize the oil.
Right.
So then we institute a puppet, right? And then they eventually revolt against that puppet, and we get a right-wing government, right? We get why am I blank?
Right-wing theological
theocracy.
Theocracy. Yeah.
We get a theocracy, and people are like, they're bad because they're a theocracy, not realizing that we created the conditions for that to happen.
Then we go, sorry to interrupt you. Then we go into Iraq, where we create a pro-Iranian.
Yes.
Because it's majority Shia, which is inclined towards Iran.
Yes.
So we throw out the Sunni dictator and create an Iran-friendly country next to Iran.
Right. Well, we created a vacuum. We created a vacuum
Well,
of
yeah.
leadership.
Yes.
And then, I don't know if you'd call it success, but I know you've traveled the area and you can see it's interesting. I think it's a generational thing. Because I know, like, for instance, in Kuwait, and it was the funniest thing the first time I went to Kuwait when we went to Johnny Rockets in Kuwait City. And we're like, wait a minute. What? And but because the younger people had gone to school in Europe and in the U.S., they like these things and they bring these things over. When you land in Kuwait, it's so funny when you land in that airport and you look around, it's like, oh, Starbucks, Victoria's. It's like you landed in a mall. It's like you landed in a mall. It's
a rich
Burger
country,
King
right,
and
Kuwait?
so yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So there are some things, I think, quality of life things that they've seen, and some things they're like, okay, this is all right. We like this. We like the convenience of this. We like how you do business here and there. So some of those things I think we've culturally shared with them. But the problem is that's not how they run their country. It's like you really have to respect the fact that they want to run their country their way. Like the Bedouins are a great example. The wandering tribes of the desert still wander. And they don't have to respect borders because all of the countries are like, yeah, the Bedouins have been doing this for thousands of years. They're not a problem, but they don't know that they just wandered from Iraq to Iran or from Egypt to whatever. So they're not carrying passports. They're herding goats. And it sounds funny until you actually see it, and you're like, wow, this is how they live, and this is how they've been living, and so I think one of the big problems in this, besides the militaristic issues, is simply culture, respecting people's cultures, understanding people's cultures, and allowing people to be who they are. You'd like that military guy, and I wish I could remember his name, but like he told me in Iraq, allowing a country to grow up. There are a lot of things that they haven't been exposed to. Like we may laugh about it, but it's true. Like where women going to school is a totally unheard of concept. That now 50 years from now,
but women went to school in Iraq until we went in there. It's like they're multiple cultures too.
Right, but what I'm saying is it's in places where girls didn't get an education and so on. These are things that are going to make a difference over a longer period of time. Like you said, we never look at the long term. Right. The Middle East has been a problem. Let's be honest. They're fighting over God. Whenever you get cultures fighting over God, my God versus your God, there's never an easy solution to that. There's never a way. There is no militaristic solution or anything else to that. It's like, I'm going to keep killing you, and like you said, terrorism as an idea, even if I don't have a home base, there's some part of me that's going to hate you. We have the problem here with gangs. We have the same problem here where,
Yeah, I guess I would say I agree with most of that. The only part where I might not agree, I don't think I agree, is that they were getting along okay. People say, well, the Shia and the Sunni have been fighting for 1,500 years. Well, they had a lot of years of peace before we came in and destabilized everything. So somewhere along the line, they kind of worked it out among themselves. Okay, you got this part, I got this part. We go in there and we destabilize the whole situation, and then all hell breaks loose.
Well, that's what I was saying. That's where the disrespect and not understanding the culture came in. The idea when we went to Iraq, Shia and Sunni. Wait, there's two types?
Right. Remember when McCain
probably should have
didn't
checked
even know.
on that before you go in.
Didn't
Probably
even know.
should have checked on that.
And then there's the Kurds and the. So here's the thing I remember is the last time. When ISIS took over Mosul, the Iraqi forces dropped their guns and walked away. That's how ISIS got all the artillery and stuff, right? All the, and it's from us. And how is it different this time? Right? Why is the Peshmerga and why is the Iraqi forces so much more willing to stand and fight this time? Do you have a theory? I don't have a theory. Before they didn't want to fight because they didn't really respect the government anyway, right? It wasn't really their thing.
Well, the Peshmerga and the Kurds are a whole different story
Yes, yes.
from the Iraqis, from the other Iraqis who are either Sunni or Shia, who either Shia, a lot of people were fighting, from what I've heard, were fighting with ISIS who weren't ideologically or religiously that crazy about them, but was just their attitude towards the central government was basically F these guys. They're disrespecting us and our village, like you were saying, Alonzo, about the village relationships and the clans and the leaderships. And they are so insulting to us, disrespect, that I'll take up with these guys who are fighting them, because I just hate that central government, which, by the way, we put in and then defended when they were doing a terrible job and corrupt and giving favors to their friends, that a lot of it wasn't even ISIS. It was just, we hate those guys, we're going to fight against them. And a lot of the people who were fighting for the government didn't feel strongly for it. So, okay, you want to come at me with a gun? Fine, take it, I don't care. They were underpaid or whatever. But the Peshmerga and the Kurds, those guys are fighters. They have a homeland they're fighting for. I think they've always had the reputation as the fierce fighters in the country. So I don't think that's anything new that they're coming in. But you don't hear that a lot of the Iraqis from surrounding areas it's the Kurds. It's you know what I mean? It's so.
But it seems like it's gonna be a bloody battle. I was listening to reports today from people from the Peshmerga saying they expect it to be block to block.
Right, they're going to go house to house.
Yeah.
Fighting, but and agreeing with what RJ was saying, I think some of the differences are commitment. They're more committed to it now, whereas that first time it was kind of like, hey, Jimmy, here's a gun, there's war, and you were like, what?
Yeah.
I give up. Commitment and training, knowing how to fight, having a plan. There was no plan. The first day it was like, okay, you guys were on your own. Here's a bunch of guns, go, and they didn't know what they were doing. They weren't committed to the fight, and I think those two things are what make it different this time. You have people who are committed, who have a belief in what they're doing, and like you said, you have people who are trained as fighters, and that makes a big difference. It's, even to have the leaders trained, then the soldiers, the troops know that there's a plan or they have someone to follow, and they're much more likely to fight and to follow knowing that.
Podcast the whole 2-hour Young Turks every single day, commercial-free, All-Star Tuesdays, Aggressive Progressives, Old School, Post Games, TYT Classics. You get it all with membership. Do it now, tytnetwork.com/join.